Welcome back to Truth Tellers. When Rebecca Torres started her dream job at Premier National Bank, she thought she'd be helping families achieve homeownership. Instead, she uncovered a $2.3 billion fraud scheme targeting the most vulnerable communities in America. Hi, I'm Helen, your narrator for today's story. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like, and smash that notification bell to be informed of new stories being added. Let's get into today's story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the glass towers of downtown Phoenix as Rebecca Torres walked through the polished marble lobby of Premier National Bank's flagship branch. Her heels clicked against the pristine floor, echoing through the cavernous space adorned with mahogany panels and crystal chandeliers. At 32, with her freshly minted MBA in finance tucked safely in her mental arsenal and 5 years of solid banking experience behind her, Rebecca felt a surge of excitement she hadn't experienced since her first job out of college. This was her moment, her chance to make a real difference in people's lives while building a career at one of America's fastest growing regional banks. Premier National had recruited her aggressively, promising a role where she could help families achieve the quintessential American dream of homeownership. Their marketing materials painted a picture of community partnership, responsible lending, and personalized service that resonated deeply with Rebecca's personal values. There's nothing more rewarding than handing someone the keys to their first home, she had told her husband, Miguel, just that morning over coffee. I want to help families build wealth and stability through responsible lending. This is what banking should be about. Miguel had smiled, knowing how passionate his wife became when she talked about her work. He'd watched her spend countless evenings during her MBA program, poring over case studies about financial inclusion and sustainable lending practices. This new position seemed perfect for her idealistic nature and analytical mind. The orientation process at Premier National was impressive. Sleek presentations about the bank's growth trajectory, sophisticated training modules on their proprietary lending software, and inspiring speeches from executives about their mission to democratize homeownership. Rebecca absorbed it all eagerly, taking meticulous notes and asking thoughtful questions that earned approving nods from her supervisors. Her new office occupied a prime spot on the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Sonoran Desert stretching toward the mountains. The space came equipped with dual monitors, a comfortable leather chair, and access to Premier National's comprehensive customer database. Everything about the environment whispered success and professionalism. Rebecca's supervisor, Michael Stevens, was a 15-year veteran of the banking industry with an easy smile and an expensive suit. During their first meeting, he outlined her responsibilities with the practiced ease of someone who had given this speech dozens of times before. Your job is simple, Michael explained, leaning back in his chair with casual confidence. Process loan applications efficiently, maintain our approval standards, and help us continue our explosive growth. We're on track for our best quarter in company history, and stellar performers like you are the reason why. The first few weeks passed in a blur of training sessions, system familiarization, and introductions to colleagues. Rebecca threw herself into the work with her characteristic enthusiasm, staying late to master the intricacies of mortgage underwriting and studying market trends in her spare time. She genuinely enjoyed the human element of her job, sitting across from hopeful families as they discussed their dreams of homeownership, calculating debt-to-income ratios, and explaining the complexities of different mortgage products. But as March melted into April, subtle inconsistencies began to catch her analytical eye. It started with small details that nagged at her analytical mind, applications that seemed to bend traditional lending standards, approval decisions that didn't quite align with the conservative practices she'd learned during her MBA program. The first case that truly troubled her involved the Martinez family, a young couple with two small children who worked in food service. Their combined annual income barely reached $42,000,
Yet they had been pre-approved for a $295,000 mortgage that would require monthly payments of nearly $2,400. When Rebecca ran the numbers, she realized this payment would consume almost 70% of their gross monthly income, far above the 28% that financial experts considered safe. She brought her concerns to Michael during their weekly one-on-one meeting, spreading the Martinez file across his polished desk with careful precision. "These borrowers," she began, her voice carrying a note of confusion, "their debt-to-income ratios are way above safe lending standards. How are these loans getting approved?" Michael barely glanced at the paperwork, dismissing her concerns with a wave of his hand and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Rebecca, we're in the business of making loans, not playing financial counselor. These borrowers are adults. They can read the contracts they're signing. Besides, you're here to process applications, not second guess our underwriting algorithms." But the Martinez case wasn't an isolated incident. As April progressed, Rebecca encountered increasingly troubling patterns in the loan applications crossing her desk. She reviewed files where single mothers working part-time retail jobs received approval for mortgages requiring payments that would consume 75% or even 80% of their income. Elderly couples on fixed Social Security payments were approved for adjustable rate mortgages that would balloon beyond their means within 2 years. Each evening, Rebecca carried these concerns home like stones in her stomach. She found she found she found herself unable to sleep, running calculations in her head and wondering how these families would manage when their mortgage payments would inevitably become unaffordable. During dinner conversations with Miguel, she shared her growing unease. "These families are being set up to fail," she confided one evening, pushing food around her plate without appetite. "They'll never be able to make these payments long term. What happens when they start defaulting?" Miguel, who worked as a high school guidance counselor, understood his wife's moral compass better than anyone. He could see the conflict building inside her as she struggled to reconcile her ethical instincts with the expectations of her new employer. "Maybe you should document what you're seeing," he suggested gently. "Keep records of these cases. If there's really a problem, someone needs to know about it." Rebecca began doing exactly that, creating a private folder on her personal laptop where she recorded details of the most concerning loan approvals she encountered. The pattern she documented was increasingly disturbing. Families with minimal savings, unstable employment, or existing debt burdens were being approved for mortgages that any reasonable analysis would flag as unsustainable. The breakthrough came on a late Tuesday evening in early May when Rebecca was working alone in the office, trying to catch up on a backlog of applications. She had stayed past 9 p.m., long before most of her colleagues had departed, leaving the normally bustling floor eerily quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of security guards making their rounds. While accessing the bank's internal system to review a particularly complex application, Rebecca inadvertently clicked on a folder labeled Strategic Initiatives that she had never noticed before. What she discovered inside would haunt her dreams and forever change her understanding of Premier National's true business model. The folder contained detailed documents outlining something called Project Harvest, a comprehensive strategy for maximizing loan volume through targeted predatory lending practices. Rebecca's hands trembled as she scrolled through presentations, spreadsheets, and internal communications that laid bare the bank's systematic scheme to exploit vulnerable borrowers. The documents revealed that Premier National had conducted extensive demographic analysis to identify communities most susceptible to predatory lending. They had mapped zip codes with high concentrations of elderly residents, immigrant families, and low-income households, then developed sophisticated marketing campaigns specifically designed to attract these vulnerable populations. Q3 Strategy Update, read one particularly chilling document. Focus on zip codes 8500 to 85019. Target demographics: limited English proficiency, fixed incomes, first-time buyers with minimal financial literacy. Goal: 300% increase in loan volume through streamlined approval process. Rebecca discovered that the bank's explosive growth wasn't the result of superior customer service or innovative products. It was the calculated exploitation of families who lacked the financial sophistication to recognize predatory lending terms. The marketing materials she had admired during orientation took on a sinister new meaning as she realized they were carefully crafted to prey upon hope and desperation. Even more disturbing were the internal communications revealing how Premier National incentivized this predatory behavior among its employees. Loan officers received massive bonuses for approving high-risk mortgages, with commission structures that explicitly rewarded officers for pushing through applications that traditional underwriting would reject. The riskier the loan, the bigger the financial reward for the officer who approved it. Rebecca found email chains where officers bragged about creative ways to massage application data, inflate income statements, and coach borrowers to omit unfavorable information. One particularly brazen message from a top-performing officer described his technique for helping applicants understand which details to emphasize and which to minimize during the application process. The key is plausible deniability, the email explained. We don't tell them to lie. We just help them frame their situation in the most positive light possible. A part-time job becomes consulting work with growth potential. Irregular income becomes variable compensation, typical in their industry. It's all about positioning. The most sickening discovery came when Rebecca found internal projections showing that Premier National's executives fully expected the majority of these predatory loans to end in foreclosure within 2 to 3 years. Far from being an unfortunate side effect, foreclosure was actually built into their business model as an acceptable outcome that still generated profits through origination fees, early payment collection, and mortgage insurance claims. An internal presentation titled Sustainable Growth Through Strategic Lending contained a slide that would be burned into Rebecca's memory forever. Average loan profitability timeline: 18 months of payments before foreclosure equals 127% return on origination costs. Foreclosure timeline allows for successful loan packaging and sale to secondary markets. They weren't just approving bad loans, they were manufacturing them with the cold calculation of an assembly line, knowing that each family they trapped in an unsustainable mortgage represented profit that could be extracted before the inevitable collapse. Rebecca sat in her darkened office, the glow of her computer screen illuminating her horrified expression as she absorbed the full scope of Premier National's operation. This wasn't banking, it was legalized theft, dressed up in the respectable language of financial services. They were stealing the American dream from families who trusted them, then packaging that theft as investment products to sell to unsuspecting institutional investors. She thought about the Martinez family, who by now had probably closed on their new home and were proudly hanging pictures on walls they would likely lose within 2 years. She thought about the elderly couple who had refinanced their paid-off home to access equity, only to find themselves trapped in a mortgage they could never repay. She thought about the single mothers who had been told they qualified for home ownership, when in reality they had been targeted for financial destruction. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on Rebecca like a physical force. She printed copies of the most damning documents, her hands shaking as she fed page after page through the office printer. Each sheet that emerged felt like evidence of a crime against the families she had entered banking to serve. By the time she left the office that night, Rebecca knew her comfortable new career was about to end. She couldn't continue processing applications knowing they were weapons designed to destroy families' financial futures. But she also knew that walking away wouldn't be enough. Too many innocent people were being hurt for her to simply quit and hope someone else would solve the problem. The next morning, Rebecca made a phone call that would change everything. She had found the contact information from Maria Santos, a housing rights attorney who had specialized in predatory lending cases and had been featured in local news coverage about mortgage fraud. Maria's firm, Santos and Associates, had built a reputation for taking on major financial institutions and winning. When Rebecca reached Maria's office, she expected to leave a voicemail. Instead, Maria answered personally, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had heard too many stories of financial exploitation. Miss Santos, my name is Rebecca Torres, and I work at Premier National Bank. I need to speak with you about something that's happening to families in our community. Something terrible. Maria's tone immediately sharpened with interest. As a housing rights attorney, she had been tracking concerning trends in the Phoenix lending market, receiving scattered reports from families who had fallen victim to predatory practices. But she had lacked the inside evidence needed to build a comprehensive case against any specific institution. "What kind of something, Miss Torres?" Maria asked gently, recognizing the fear in Rebecca's voice. "Systematic predatory lending," Rebecca replied, the words tumbling out in a rush. "They're deliberately targeting vulnerable families with mortgages they know will fail. I have documented evidence of the entire operation." They arranged to meet that afternoon at Maria's law office, a modest suite in a converted historical building near downtown Phoenix. Rebecca arrived carrying a briefcase containing printed copies of Premier National's internal documents, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Maria Santos was a woman in her early 50s with prematurely gray hair and intense brown eyes that reflected decades of fighting for families who couldn't fight for themselves. She listened without interruption as Rebecca laid out the entire scope of Project Harvest, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting the evidence speak for itself. "Rebecca," Maria said when the presentation was complete, "what you are describing is exactly what destroyed communities across America in 2008. These practices aren't just unethical, they're violations of federal fair lending laws, truth in lending regulations, and consumer protection statutes." Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that someone believed her and understood the severity of what she had discovered. Terror at the implications of challenging a major financial institution with vast legal resources and connections throughout the business community. "I have documentation of everything," Rebecca said, her voice stronger now. "These families deserve better." But Premier National's response came faster and more aggressively than either woman had anticipated. Within 24 hours of Rebecca's meeting with Maria, she arrived at work to find her computer access restricted and a terse email requesting her immediate presence in Michael's office for an urgent meeting with the bank's compliance department. Rebecca walked into what felt like an ambush. Michael sat behind his desk wearing an expression of cold professionalism, flanked by Jennifer Walsh, the bank's chief compliance officer, and David Chen, a lawyer from Premier National's legal department. The atmosphere in the room was thick, with barely concealed hostility. "Rebecca," Michael began without preamble, "we've identified serious irregularities in your loan portfolio. Several applications show signs of unauthorized modifications to borrower information." Rebecca felt her heart racing as she realized the trap being laid for her. "Those modifications were made by other officers. I was questioning their validity, not making changes." Jennifer Walsh opened a thick folder and began reading from what appeared to be a prepared statement. "Our investigation shows that your access credentials were used to modify income figures, debt obligations, and employment information on numerous loan applications. These modifications consistently resulted in higher approval rates for borrowers who would otherwise have been rejected." "That's not what happened," Rebecca protested, her voice rising. "I was documenting questionable practices, not engaging in them." David Chen leaned forward with the predatory smile of someone who had orchestrated this confrontation. "Ms. Torres, we have keystroke logs, document revision histories, and access records that paint a very different picture. What you are describing as documenting questionable practices looks remarkably like federal banking fraud from a regulatory perspective." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. Her legitimate attempts to investigate predatory lending were being twisted into evidence of her own fraudulent behavior. The very access logs that showed her reviewing suspicious files were being presented as proof that she had created those suspicious modifications in the first place. "We're prepared to handle this matter internally," Michael continued, "but that requires your full cooperation with our compliance review. Any external communications about these issues would complicate our ability to resolve them quietly." The threat was clear without being explicit. Cooperate with their internal whitewash, or face federal fraud charges that could destroy her career and possibly send her to prison. It was a masterfully constructed frame that would discredit her as a witness while simultaneously sending a message to any other employees who might consider speaking out. Rebecca left that meeting in a state of shocked disbelief. But her ordeal was just beginning. The intimidation campaign that followed was sophisticated in its psychological cruelty and terrifying in its reach into every aspect of her personal life. It started with phone calls to her home, always from blocked numbers, always featuring voices she didn't recognize. The callers never made explicit threats, but their message was unmistakably menacing.
Ms. Torres, one caller said in a tone of false concern, banking is a relationship business. Relationships can be damaged when trust is broken. Your reputation in this community, your family's reputation, these things matter more than you might realize. Another caller was more direct. People who make trouble for their employers sometimes find that trouble has a way of following them home. You have a nice family, a nice house. It would be a shame if your poor judgment affected their security. The psychological warfare escalated beyond phone calls. Rebecca discovered that her credit score had mysteriously dropped by 200 points overnight due to suspicious activity flags that appeared on all her accounts simultaneously. Her mortgage lender received anonymous tips about potential employment instability that triggered a review of her home loan terms. Credit card companies that had solicited her business for years suddenly denied routine applications, citing inconsistent financial behavior that didn't exist in any legitimate records. Most chillingly, Rebecca began to notice surveillance that was obvious enough to be noticed, but subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. The same cars appeared in her neighborhood at unusual hours. Unfamiliar individuals loitered near her children's school and Miguel's workplace. Her phone calls began experiencing strange clicking sounds and brief disconnections that suggested monitoring. "They're using the financial system itself as a weapon against me," Rebecca confided to Miguel one evening as they sat in their kitchen, speaking in whispers despite being in their own home. "How do you fight a bank when they control your entire financial life?" Miguel watched his wife struggling under the weight of psychological pressure designed to break her resolve, and his protective instincts warred with his admiration for her courage. He knew Rebecca well enough to understand that backing down wasn't in her nature, but he also feared for his family's safety and security. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult aspect of the campaign against her. Rebecca found herself ostracized at work, with colleagues avoiding eye contact and conversations dying when she entered rooms. Former friends in the banking industry stopped returning her calls, clearly having received warnings about associating with someone under investigation for fraud. But Maria Santos refused to be intimidated, and her investigation into Premier National's practices was gaining momentum despite the bank's efforts to discredit their primary witness. Maria had been building predatory lending cases for over 2 decades, and she recognized the signs of institutional retaliation when she saw them. "They're trying to destroy your credibility before we can present our evidence," Maria explained during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from downtown Phoenix. "But they've made a crucial mistake. By retaliating against you so aggressively, they've actually corroborated your allegations. Their behavior is evidence of guilt." Maria's investigation had uncovered a pattern of abuse that extended far beyond Phoenix. Former Premier National employees in 6 different states had contacted her office with similar stories of pressure to approve predatory loans. Foreclosure records showed suspicious clusters of Premier National mortgages in low-income neighborhoods that had defaulted within 18 months of origination. Federal banking data revealed that Premier National's default rates were more than 3 times the industry average, yet their profits continued to soar. "We have documented evidence of systematic predatory lending across multiple jurisdictions," Maria told Rebecca with growing confidence. "Your insider documentation is the missing piece that ties together months of investigation. The story goes public tomorrow with full regulatory backing." Rebecca felt a mixture of relief
and terror as she realized her fight was about to become very public. She had hoped that internal channels or quiet legal pressure might force Premier National to reform their practices, but she now understood that only the harsh light of public scrutiny would be sufficient to stop the systematic exploitation of vulnerable families. Premier National's legal team, led by one of Phoenix's most prestigious white shoe law firms, launched a preemptive strike designed to destroy both Maria's credibility and Rebecca's reputation before their allegations could gain traction. They filed ethics complaints with the State Bar Association, alleging that Maria had engaged in improper solicitation of clients and coached witnesses to provide false testimony. They simultaneously leaked information suggesting that Rebecca was a disgruntled employee at TAG who had been terminated for fraudulent behavior and was now trying to deflect attention from her own crimes. The bank's public relations machine swung into action with military precision. Press releases emphasized Premier National's long history of community service and responsible lending. Carefully selected customer testimonials praised the bank's commitment to helping families achieve homeownership. Industry experts were quoted defending the bank's lending practices as innovative approaches to financial inclusion that helped underserved communities access credit. But Maria had spent years building relationships with investigative journalists who understood the complexities of financial fraud, and she had chosen her timing carefully. Her story would break simultaneously in the Phoenix New Times, the Arizona Republic, and the Wall Street Journal, with coordinated coverage that would be difficult to suppress or discredit. The morning of May 15th, 2023, Rebecca woke to find her phone buzzing with notifications as news of Premier National's predatory lending scheme exploded across local and national media. The headline in the Arizona Republic read, "How Your Community Bank Became a Foreclosure Factory, Inside Premier National's Systematic Exploitation of Phoenix Families." The Wall Street Journal's coverage was even more damning, with the headline, "Internal Documents Reveal Deliberate Targeting of Vulnerable Borrowers by Growing Regional Bank." The article featured Rebecca's internal documentation alongside Maria's legal analysis and interviews with families who had lost their homes to Premier National's predatory loans. Rebecca's telephone didn't stop ringing as reporters sought interviews and banking regulators requested her cooperation with their investigations. She had become the public face of a financial scandal that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's ability to control. Premier National's stock price began plummeting within hours of the first news reports, falling from $47 per share to $31 by the close of trading on the day the story broke. The bank's carefully cultivated image as a responsible community lender was evaporating in real time as more details emerged about Project Harvest and the systematic nature of their predatory practices. Federal banking regulators, who had been quietly investigating scattered complaints about Premier National for months, suddenly found themselves under intense public pressure to take decisive action. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency announced a comprehensive audit of Premier National's lending practices across all 47 branches in their network. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau launched a parallel investigation focused specifically on fair lending violations and consumer protection issues. Rebecca's testimony before federal regulators was scheduled for June 3rd, giving her several weeks to prepare for what she knew would be the most important professional appearance of her life. Maria helped her organize the mountain of evidence they had collected, creating a chronological narrative that demonstrated the systematic nature of Premier National's predatory lending program. The hearing took place in a sterile federal building in downtown Phoenix, with Rebecca seated at a witness table facing a panel of banking regulators, congressional staffers, and Justice Department attorneys. Her hands trembled slightly as she began reading from her prepared statement, but her voice grew stronger as she described what she had witnessed inside Premier National. Banking should build communities, not destroy them. When we approve loans we know will fail, we're not serving customers, we're exploiting their dreams of homeownership for our own profit. She walked the investigators through Premier National's targeting strategies, showing how the bank had identified vulnerable populations and developed marketing campaigns specifically designed to attract borrowers who lacked the financial sophistication to recognize predatory terms. She explained the bonus structures that incentivize loan officers to push through applications that should have been rejected, and she detailed the internal communications that revealed executives celebrating foreclosures as profitable business outcomes. These weren't accidental approvals or isolated cases of poor judgment. This was a systematic operation designed to extract maximum profit from families who trusted Premier National to help them achieve homeownership responsibly. The evidence Rebecca presented was devastating in its comprehensiveness and chilling in its implications. Internal projections showing expected foreclosure rates, marketing materials targeting specific demographic groups, and bonus structures rewarding predatory approvals painted a picture of institutional corruption that extended far beyond individual bad actors. Premier National's legal team attempted to discredit Rebecca's testimony by focusing on her alleged fraudulent activities and questioning her motivations for coming forward. But the bank's aggressive retaliation campaign had backfired spectacularly. Their obvious attempts to intimidate and silence Rebecca only reinforced the credibility of her allegations. The regulatory response was swift and severe. Within 2 weeks of Rebecca's testimony, Premier National faced $2.3 billion in fines and was placed under federal oversight that effectively ended their independence as a financial institution. 7 executives, including CEO Richard Hartwell and Chief Lending Officer Patricia Newman, were indicted on federal charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of fair lending laws, and racketeering. The bank's stock price continued its freefall, losing 75% of its value as investors fled and regulators froze new lending activities pending comprehensive reforms. Premier National, which had once been celebrated as one of America's fastest growing regional banks, was now facing potential bankruptcy or forced sale to a larger institution. But the victory came at an enormous personal cost for Rebecca. The 16 months following her testimony were a nightmare of financial harassment, legal battles, and psychological warfare as Premier National's allies attempted to destroy her life, even as their own institution crumbled. Her banking career was effectively over, at least temporarily. No financial institution would hire someone who had exposed industry practices so publicly, regardless of federal whistleblower protections. Her family's credit remained damaged by the mysterious flags that had appeared on their accounts.
Legal bills from defending against Premier National's retaliatory lawsuits consumed their savings and forced them to downsize their home. Rebecca found herself working as a freelance financial consultant, helping individual families understand mortgage terms and avoid predatory lending, work that was meaningful but paid a fraction of her former banking salary. Miguel picked up extra hours at the school district to help make ends meet, and they were forced to delay plans for their children's college education. The psychological toll was even more severe than the financial hardship. Rebecca suffered from anxiety attacks and insomnia, constantly worried about new forms of retaliation against her family. She jumped at unexpected phone calls and found herself checking and rechecking locks on doors and windows. The stress of fighting a major corporation with unlimited legal resources had fundamentally changed her relationship with the financial system she had once trusted. But gradually, as federal investigations confirmed her allegations and Premier National's executives began facing criminal prosecution, Rebecca's reputation was rehabilitated. Whistleblower protection laws eventually forced the restoration of her professional credentials and provided some compensation for the financial losses she had suffered. More importantly, the regulatory changes triggered by her testimony began preventing other families from falling victim to predatory lending schemes. New federal regulations required independent verification of borrower qualifications, banned the bonus structures that rewarded predatory lending, and established stronger oversight of community banks' lending practices. Rebecca eventually launched a nonprofit organization called Fair Lending Watch, dedicated to helping families understand mortgage terms and recognize predatory lending practices before they become victims. The organization provides free financial literacy workshops in the same communities that Premier National had systematically targeted, teaching families how to recognize warning signs of predatory loans and connect with legitimate lending resources. A home should be a source of security, not a trap that destroys families financially, Rebecca reflected during an interview marking the 1-year anniversary of Premier National's collapse. Every loan officer has the power to either build dreams or crush them. I chose to build dreams, even when it meant sacrificing my own career. The broader impact of Rebecca's courage extended far beyond Premier National. Her case became a teaching example in business schools and banking programs, illustrating both the devastating consequences of predatory lending and the crucial role that individual employees can play in preventing institutional corruption. Federal prosecutors used the evidence Rebecca provided to build cases against predatory lenders across multiple states, resulting in billions of dollars in fines and thousands of mortgage modifications that saved families from foreclosure. The Justice Department created a new task force focused specifically on financial institutions that target vulnerable populations with predatory products. Today, Rebecca continues her work advocating for fair lending practices and helping families navigate the complex world of mortgage financing. Her nonprofit has expanded to serve families in 12 states, providing free counseling and education that helps people achieve sustainable home ownership while avoiding predatory traps. The scars from her battle with Premier National remain visible in the financial struggles her family still faces, in the hypervigilance she maintains about potential retaliation, and in the deep skepticism she now holds toward the banking industry she once served with such enthusiasm. But those scars are accompanied by the knowledge that her courage prevented thousands of families from losing their homes to a predatory scheme designed to exploit their dreams. Rebecca's story serves as a powerful reminder that individual integrity can triumph over institutional corruption, but only when people are willing to risk everything for principles that matter more than personal security. In an industry where profit margins often obscure moral clarity, those who choose courage over complicity remain our best hope for a financial system that truly serves the communities it claims to support. The gleaming towers of downtown Phoenix still house major financial institutions, but Rebecca Torres's legacy ensures that the families seeking home ownership within those buildings now have protections that didn't exist before one loan officer decided that her conscience was worth more than her career. In a world where the American dream is often packaged and sold by the very institutions that should protect it, voices like Rebecca's remain our most powerful defense against those who would exploit hope for profit. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against corporate greed isn't a lawsuit or an investigation. It's simply one person who refuses to stay silent when they witness injustice. As Rebecca often tells the family she counsels, your home should be your sanctuary, not their profit center. The banking reforms triggered by Rebecca's testimony are still in effect today, preventing an estimated $12 billion in predatory lending losses annually. Inspired by truth, brought to life by fiction. Thanks for listening.